industry is pushing to make it easier for them to pollute the environment and destroy our planet. But before I do, let me put my opposition to this disastrous side deal into a broader context. Mr. President, as the father of 4 kids and the grandfather of 7, I very much wish that I did not have to say what I am going to say. But the most serious challenge facing our country and the entire world, far and away, is in fact the existential threat of climate change. That is not the opinion of Bernie Sanders, who failed physics in college. That is what the scientific community is telling us in a virtually unanimous voice. The latest report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, is very clear, and it is very foreboding. If the United States, China, Russia, and the rest of the world do not act extremely aggressively in cutting carbon emissions, our planet will face enormous and irreversible damage. In fact, the world that we will be leaving to our kids and to future generations will become increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable. That's not Bernie Sanders. That is the virtual unanimous conclusion of the scientists who study this issue. But the truth is, we don't need the scientists or another study to tell us what's happening. We see it with our own eyes here in the United States and all over the world. The American people today and people throughout the globe are seeing the devastating impact climate change is having on their communities and their families with their own eyes. That is what they are seeing right now as I speak. And please understand, and maybe the most important point I want to make this morning, is that everything being equal, what is happening right now will become worse and worse and worse. This is not, oh boy, we had a torrential rain. Oh boy, ain't it hot? Everything being equal, what we are seeing today will become worse in years to come. Let's just take a brief look at what's happening right now in the United States and around the world. The past 8 years have been the hottest years in recorded history. Right now, the western half of the United States is experiencing its worst drought in over 1,200 years. Right now, in California, Nevada, and Utah, they are experiencing record-breaking heat waves. Historic rainfall and devastating floods took place over a 5-week stretch this summer in eastern Kentucky, eastern Illinois, St. Louis, Missouri, Death Valley, California, and Dallas, Texas. These are supposed to be a once-in-a-thousand-year torrential rainfalls, and we're seeing them coming all together within a few weeks. Right now, Europe is experiencing its worst drought in over 500 years. And let's remember, when we talk about drought, it's not only, boy, is it hot, it impacts agricultural production and the quantity and quality of food that we eat. Mr. President, a massive heat wave in Spain and Portugal killed more than 2,000 people in July. Historically hot weather in London and China literally melted bridges, airplane runways, and rooftops. Let me repeat that. The extremely hot weather in London and in China this summer literally melted bridges, rooftops, and airplane runways, with all of the consequences that has. Mr. President, record-breaking forest fires in Europe have already burned 1.6 million acres of land, 56% more than the previous record set in 2017, and that is a size that is over 8 times bigger than New York City. Record-breaking drought in China has caused parts of the Yangtze River to completely dry up. The Yangtze River is the 3rd largest river in the world. It is the source of drinking water for 400 million people. Catastrophic rainfall and massive floods have been going on for weeks in Pakistan, killing at least 1,200 people and displacing another 10 million, as 1/3 of Pakistan is now underwater. And if all of this is not sobering enough, it's not frightening enough, a glacier in Antarctica that scientists have dubbed the Doomsday Glacier has been in rapid retreat and is melting much faster than previous predictions. Without this glacier and its supporting ice shelves, sea levels could rise by 3 to 10 feet, which would cause entire coastal communities to flood and go underwater forever. We are talking about major cities here in the United States and across the world that could be underwater in the coming decades. Just think for a moment about the massive dislocation, turmoil, and international tensions that will occur when millions of people migrate from where they have lived into new areas. And the tragedies and disturbances and destruction goes on and on and on. Mr. President, in the past, a series of climate disasters like these might have seemed like a silly plot in a bad movie about the apocalypse. Unfortunately, however, what we are living through now is not a movie, it is reality. This is what we are experiencing right now in front of us. And again, this entire scenario, what we are seeing now, will almost definitely become worse in years to come if the United States, China, and the rest of the world do not get our act together and break our dependency on fossil fuels. And one of the strange ironies about this moment is that if the United States did all of the right things tomorrow, it would not be enough. We need the cooperation of China and of countries throughout the world. We as a planet are in this together, and we're going to have to act decisively. And in my view, the largest economy in the world, which is the United States of America, must lead this effort. If we retreat, it sends a terrible message to countries all over the world. And if we retreat, clearly what we will be seeing are more floods, more rising sea levels, more extreme weather disturbances, more ocean acidification, more drought, more famine, more disease, and more human suffering. And today, to all of my colleagues here in the Senate who have kids and grandchildren, I think that's almost everybody, I just ask you to think ahead 10, 15, 20 years. Think about the discussion you'll be having with your kids or your grandchildren when that young person looks you in the eye and says, "Dad, Grandma, what did you do to save the planet?" And I want you to think about that. We all know that climate change is real. We know that climate change is caused by carbon emissions. No one disagrees with that. We know that climate change is already causing devastating destruction throughout the world. We know that if we don't rapidly transform our energy system away from fossil fuels toward energy efficiency and renewable energy, the situation will only become much worse, and our planet will face irreparable and irreversible harm. That's the simple reality. And yet, given all that we know, given all that the scientists are telling us, what is the United States Congress about to do? Well, Mr. President, the United States Congress is seriously considering legislation to provide a huge giveaway to the fossil fuel industry to drill, produce, and sell more oil and gas. Really. At a time when climate change is threatening the very existence of our planet, why would anybody be talking about substantially increasing carbon emissions and expanding fossil fuel production in the United States? What kind of message does this send to the people of our own country, to the young people, and to suffering people all over the world, that in the midst of this horrific crisis caused by fossil fuel emissions, we're about to pass legislation to increase fossil fuel production? Mr. President, like every other member of the Senate, I have a pretty good understanding of how politics works in our corrupt political system. Like every other senator, I understand what campaign contributions are about. I understand what the thousands of lobbyists all over Capitol Hill do, and I surely understand the extraordinary power of the fossil fuel industry to push the legislation that they want. In fact, they were successful for decades in lying to the American people about the reality of climate change. So I know about the power of the fossil fuel industry. But today I beg of my colleagues that at this moment, when the future of the world is literally at stake, that at this moment we have the courage to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and to tell them and the politicians that they sponsor that the future of the planet is more important than their short-term profits. Mr. President, in the coming weeks and months, the Senate has a fundamental choice to make. We can listen to the fossil fuel industry and the politicians they pay, who are spending huge amounts of money on lobbying and campaign contributions to pass this dirty side deal. Or we can listen to the scientists and the environmental community who are telling us loudly and clearly to reject this side deal and eliminate the $15 billion in tax breaks and subsidies Congress is already providing to big oil and gas companies each and every year. Mr. President, while the legislative text of the side deal has not been made public, according to a one-page summary that was released last month, this bill would make it easier for the fossil fuel industry to receive permits to complete some of the dirtiest and most polluting oil and gas projects in America. Specifically, this deal would approve the $6.6 billion Mountain Valley Pipeline, a 303-mile frack gas pipeline spanning from West Virginia to Virginia and potentially on to North Carolina. We're talking about a pipeline that would generate emissions equivalent to 37 coal plants or over 27 million cars each and every year. Mr. President, it is hard for me to understand why anyone who is concerned about climate change would consider for 1 second voting to approve a pipeline that would be equivalent to putting 27 million more cars on the road each and every year, especially at a time we're trying to transition into electric vehicles. Mr. President, on August 24th, over 650 environmental and civil rights organizations wrote a letter to Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi urging them to reject this ideal. This letter was signed by the Sierra Club, the Sunrise Movement, Friends of the Earth, Physicians for Social Responsibility, 350.org, Greenpeace, Public Citizens, People's Action, and the NAACP. And here is a summary of what the letter says. Quote, this is a letter signed by 650 environmental and civil rights groups. Quote, on behalf of 653 frontline communities and environmental organizations representing millions of members and supporters nationwide, we are writing to express our strenuous opposition to any additional fossil fuel giveaways. Alarming proposals have been referenced by Senator Manchin in a short memo and in legislative language that was clearly drafted in consultation with the American Petroleum Institute. It has reported that Manchin has demanded these handouts to the fossil fuel industry as a further price for his vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which already included large giveaways to polluters. We call on you to unequivocally reject any effort to promote fossil fuels, advance unproven technologies, and weaken our core environmental laws. This fossil fuel wish list is a cruel and direct attack on environmental justice communities and the climate. This legislation would truncate and hollow out the environmental review process, weaken tribal consultations, and make it far harder for frontline communities to have their voices heard by gutting bedrock protections in the National Environmental Policy Act and Clean Water Act. Supporting this legislation will represent a profound betrayal of frontline communities and constituents across the country who have called on you to advance a just, renewable energy future. End of quote. That is from 650 environmental organizations. Mr. President, I could not agree more, and I would ask unanimous consent to include this entire letter in the congressional record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I should also add that at least 59 of our colleagues in the House of Representatives will soon be releasing a letter expressing strong opposition to this side deal. Now, let me briefly quote from that letter. Quote, according to media reports, there is agreement to advance a series of anti-environmental and anti-environmental justice provisions through the House at the behest of the American Petroleum Institute. These destructive provisions will allow polluting manufacturing and energy development projects to be rushed through before the families who are forced to live near them are even aware of the plans. We remain deeply concerned that these serious and detrimental permitting provisions will significantly and disproportionately impact low-income communities, indigenous communities, and communities of color. The inclusion of these provisions in a continuing resolution or any other must-pass legislation would silence the voices of frontline and environmental justice communities by insulating them from scrutiny. Such a move would force members to choose between protecting environmental justice communities from further pollution or funding the government. We urge you to ensure that these provisions are kept out of a continuing resolution or any other must-pass legislation this year. End of quote. That is a letter that comes from over 50 of our colleagues in the House of Representatives. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to insert that letter into the congressional record.
Without objection.
So there we are, Mr. President. You got 650 environmental and social justice organizations representing millions of people. You got the entire scientific community saying we've got to cut carbon emissions. And then on the other side, we have the fossil fuel industry and all of their campaign contributions. So that's what it is. So today I ask my colleagues to stand up for our kids, for our grandchildren, and for future generations. We have got to have the courage to finally tell the fossil fuel industry that the future of this planet is more important than their short-term profits. Mr. President, I thank you, and I yield the floor.